And it's on. So yeah, welcome to the 12th meeting of the Nixpkgs architecture team. Let's get started. So, right, I am recording again today, also taking meeting notes and leading the meeting. Fill this out here. So since last time I made so last week we didn't meet, but 2 weeks in the past, we discussed having the agenda on Discourse announced like a day beforehand. And I did that yesterday, and I think that was good, kind of going through the chat logs of the past week to see what happened and what was discussed. There wasn't any proposals for additional agenda items in the Discourse post, but I think let's keep going with that. So the three main topics discussed, Robert says that NET is a bit of, he doesn't like NET as an acronym. I'm also not entirely in on it, but it's easy to type and short to type, which is the main advantage. Yeah, another proposal was NA team, but that also sounds kind of terrible. Anyways, so yeah, let's go through the agenda items. Also, last time we discussed only making the meeting 30 minutes long and only discussing the agenda that was agreed upon beforehand and not kind of diverging into other topics, so that you could propose agenda items beforehand and kind of expect what is being discussed in these meetings. So yeah, the first one was initially pointed out by I think that's Alex Amin. He's not here right now, but then David and Prof. Patch also chimed into this discussion. Also, I think Robert later. For using the module system for packages. Again, I think we've had that discussion a couple of times already, but I personally still think it's kind of a good idea in general to use a module system or something like it. So we have Robert, Prof. Patch, and David here now.
Hello. Can I say something to this?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, so we had the topic already quite a few times. And I somehow have the feeling that often when we discuss about this, like the discussion often pretty quickly derails in, oh no, the module system is bad because of this and this reason, or maybe it's too inefficient, or something like this. But for me, the main point is that from a user perspective, just looking at the UI, just looking at what kind of code do I need to write in order to make things happen, the Nixos module system seems to be like a much better choice comparing to calling override functions. So I thought maybe it's a good idea to not start discussing about implementation details. Obviously, they're going to be important later on when realizing this, but maybe we could start differently and just make examples, like collect examples. What are we doing with overrides right now, and how could it look like if we use something similar to the Nixos module system? It doesn't need to be exactly the Nixos module system. Maybe it's something better. Maybe it's something with a few little changes or optimized for performance. I don't know. So I created this little repository here, which is already in the matrix agenda. I'll just post it again right now. So I just started out with two examples. One where I picked the hello package and modified it a little bit and showed how it would look like with overrides and how it would look like using the module system. And yeah, maybe that can be used as a starting point. Maybe we can just add more examples there. And and explore this a little bit, because maybe it's a better approach to first agree on what should the interface for the user look like, and then we can check, okay, is it feasible to implement it? What would be the problems implementing it? Maybe we have to change it a little bit in order to make it feasible, but maybe we shouldn't start with discussing about implementation details. So yeah, if you have any ideas or comments, or if you think it's a bad idea, then I'm very interested. And if you have other examples, or if you think, oh, I have this overrides use case that that can probably not be implemented with the Nixos module system, then please provide the example, and then maybe we can use that as a challenge and see if that problem is still solvable with Nixos modules or not. Yeah, that's it from my side.
Yeah, Prof. Patch.
Maybe one thing to take into account, of course, in implementation detail, but the check meta change that started out by using the module system, and I did a few benchmarks 2 or 3 days ago, and it looked like the commit that had the module system that used the module system slowed down Nixpkgs evaluation by like 70 or 80%. So instead of 3 or 4 seconds for a simple NixOS test evaluation, it was like 7 or 8. I'm not sure if that's because that was just an experiment. So maybe that's just because the experiment was not very performant. But it might also be that like initializing the NixOS module system many times just has a lot of overhead. So there should be some benchmarks before anything is done to change to add some type checks that are run every time evaluation is done.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think we should not move to a different model if we didn't benchmark it properly and make sure that it doesn't impact performance too much.
Like the benchmark I went with was just run a bench util on the NixOS tests.simple evaluation, which is I think it's a good test for the module system because it has to evaluate all the options, of course.
Yeah, I think I think we all agree that we need to certainly do benchmarks before we do any of these changes to, especially like all the package evaluation. But yeah, I guess as David said, I think it's a good idea to like just look at it from like a user's perspective for a start, and then we can kind of see whether it can be implemented and kind of just agree upon the module system, the module system interface being much better than the overriding interface. I guess that's a main point, David, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and so I feel like that's also kind of very uncontroversial because the module system is just really good to configure things. But yeah, I guess the main question is, can we configure everything that's needed? And personally, I think we can do everything that's needed with the module system. Like
So-
it has shown its flexibility with NixOS. Yeah.
Yeah, so my idea of moving that forward would be, first we'll come up with more examples to really make sure that whatever interface we would like has at least all the most necessary features that we need. And then the next step could be just to make it usable somehow, make an implementation that just works on top of the current Nix packages, which is probably really hacky. Maybe underneath it just calls out to the different override functions that are required or whatever. So just hack something together that makes it work somehow. So there's like a prototype that people can use. Maybe it's very inefficient, but you can use it and you can play with it. And then maybe it's used by some people for testing, and then afterwards as a next step, then we could come up with like a better way to implement it.
Yeah, I do want to quickly see NBP and Matrix write some messages. So he says, so relating to the using the module system for package configuration, maybe for package hierarchies, this sounds heavyweight. The module system offers to plug mentally consistent components and linearize the resolution of the options relying on the laziness. All right, that sounds pretty good. Thing is, packages do not have problems where we have to reorder the evaluations. The dependencies is the interface requiring the ordering the resolution. I'm not entirely sure how relevant that is. Things packages do not have problems. Anyways, but yeah, I think the general plan sounds pretty good to me. Right, like the module system does work really well, and we can't really deny that. So yeah, like I feel like it's really up to coming up with all the examples, coming up with an example interface that works for all the packages and all the options we want to configure. Right. I guess something I want to mention though is that we do need to somehow have a way to transition or to migrate to a new interface. And this would be a really big change that's not entirely, or it feels hard to make it backwards compatible, since the whole, if you have modules and you have overlays, and then you have modules and overlays and overrides interacting with each other, that might be pretty hard, unless, as you say, we implement modules as overrides underneath, or maybe the other way around. But then again, the whole overriding thing does allow functions. It is very much based on functions, which the module system doesn't really work with. The module system itself is kind of like a function. It takes inputs and it gives outputs in other options. So it is a different model, and not sure how well that's going to work. So I'm mostly concerned about migration, is I guess the main point I want to say. Yes. So problems, Robert mentions on Matrix, problems to be solved by the module system, over-reliance on functions, and difficulty in overriding those. UX issues like discoverability, type checking, yes. Wait, so Robert says problems to be solved by the module system. Over-reliance on functions. I don't think the module system over-relies on functions. Like, functions are fairly rarely used in the module system.
So maybe you can scroll up just 3 or 4 lines so that we see both examples on your screen.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So, in my opinion, this example should be enough to convince people that you can have very, very deep technical discussions. But if you're a user and you're starting out with Nix, or even if you're a pro with Nix, it's much nicer to type, to read, and to understand the bottom example than the one at the top. So only if it was just about that, improvement is already quite beneficial, I think. But on top of that, of course, with something like the module system, we're going to get maybe type checking, but definitely documentation, automatically generated documentation and stuff like this, which the override system does not have.
Yeah.
In practice, would that look like in the package? Would that look like the current config also looks, where you just say, like, check whether this config setting is true or false, and if yes, then do something else in the module. But instead of using like just an attribute on the top of the file, you get it from the global config object. That was a question that wasn't phrased like a question.
So you're kind of thinking of like config.enable pulse audio, for example, which is currently like a global option in the config namespace.
For example, the git definition would have to say like, oh, I have to pass the Python support config option to the git build. So instead of like using Python support from the function call of the package, I would instead use like config.python support, where config comes from the global Nixpkgs.
I guess that would be possible. Yeah, you can basically, if the module that defines Git could define for the git.python support as a default value the global Python support variable. Yeah.
I mean, the problem I have with this is that then it would be impossible to say I want one Git with Python and one Git without Python, which is a super valid use case in some situations.
I think we can make that work somehow. So even if you take it like this, you can just import Nixpkgs twice with a different config, for example. But then there's probably more efficient ways to do it. Maybe instead of config.packages, you could have config.package sets, and then that's a attribute set of submodules. You could, for example, define config.package set1.git is equal something, or package sets.set2.git. So you can have different sets, define different sets of packages as a submodule.
Yeah, but I think let's not go into like too much details for examples here. But I think it's a really good idea for Profpatch to like come up with an example to try to break this and show an example of where it might not really work. And then, right, David, you could try to disprove that and come up with
exactly that's
something that might work.
That would be really nice. So just show some examples on me, and then we can work out the solution.
Are you at Nixcon, David?
If I'm participating in Nixcon?
Yes.
Yes,
or
for
like,
sure.
In Paris, because I will be there, so maybe we can just have like a small workshop or something.
Yeah, definitely. I'll be there.
Nice, and I'll also be there at Nixcon. All right, but yeah, I think that sounds good. But yeah, this is definitely interesting here. More examples to come. Nice. I hope we can make like a library of module system examples that could convince other people. And by the way, Robert has made like a kind of strapped down version of the module system, or like a prototype of a strapped down version of the module system that doesn't have a lot of the odd corners of the existing one, and I think it should be much faster. So something like that would definitely be possible to use for the implementation, so that it's not as slow as currently. Yes, I'd say that sounds good. Can we move on to the next item, or does anybody want to say something about that right now? So I think main conclusion: come up with examples, try to disprove it, and kind of really try to show how the module system can or cannot work. All right, I think that sounds good to everybody. Let's move on to the next agenda item. And that is, right, Philip, Profpatch mentioned this earlier already, the kind of stability guarantees in Nixpkgs is what I summarized it as. And this was kind of prompted by the type checking meta PR. Oh, that's not the one. I'll open it here. So this is a PR that kind of prompted this. It mainly enables checking the meta attribute in packages. And it does this in a way that breaks third-party packages. And that's, in my opinion, and I think, and Prof. Patch's opinion, and a lot of other people's opinion, that's not good. The Nix packages should kind of maintain third-party compatibility or backwards compatibility. And as far as I know, this was changed. So I think, yeah, Prof. Patch made a PR, and I believe it just doesn't check it by default, which means third-party packages still work. Is that right, that this PR makes it backwards compatible, the change in the first one?
Yes. I mean, basically retracted most of the change. Some of the refactors it didn't, but the flip of the flag was reverted because a bunch of downstream projects who define their own meta flags were, of course, complaining that suddenly evaluation doesn't work anymore.
Yeah. Attributes failing. Yeah, and so I think, yeah, so I'm glad the PR it was merged by PyGamesD, who is the author of the original PR as well. But it's good that they merged it themselves. I think the conclusion here was something like, should we take a closer look at this? Like the discussion here and how it came to be? Yeah, from what I know, Pygames was a bit out of line with, like, I think he also merged the original PR themselves. Oh, can't find it. But yeah, as far as I know, they merged the original PR themselves, which I don't think is very great especially when it's backwards incompatible change. And so I'm glad that you pointed this out, Prof. Patch, that we shouldn't really allow this. And I'd say, yeah, we in the team, we probably all agree that we can't make these kind of backwards incompatible changes, that we should have a proper deprecation timeline for such things. Can I maybe quickly do the rounds here? So Robert, Tom, does this sound good to you as well as like the other members here?
What in particular?
So like just having a proper deprecation strategy for changes in Nix packages, and how this change was not in line with that, and how we should maybe establish a better deprecation strategy.
Right.
The kind of,
I'm pretty sure we did this. This was brought up in a previous agenda item about having and maintaining and publishing a deprecation policy. But I think that while there is, yes, general agreement on that, actually what that policy is was never really defined and probably never even really announced.
For me, intuitively, it's mostly about like potential debugging sessions that users have to do after something changes that they don't anticipate. Even without reading the changelog, like there can be an argument, like I think Alyssa made it, that everybody should be reading the changelog, but I know that I'm definitely not reading the changelog every time I update. So, for example, if something changes that might lead me to have to debug for a day because it's like a runtime thing that is super hard to Google for something, then that's like the worst that I can think of. And then the next, like the other one is like if it's super annoying because I don't feel it's a super important change, but it still breaks my workflow. For example, when evaluation stops, that's usually also always annoying for people because that blocks them completely and they can't do anything before they don't fix evaluation again.
Yeah. So I've also kind of ran into some things like that with I just updated my Nexus system like yesterday, and I've seen like just evaluation break for the update, and I fixed all warnings before the update, like there were no warnings there, and so that's also kind of bad. And I think in particular some things that were coming up there were deprecations of attributes in Nixpkgs. And these attributes were removed without any warning, or they were aliased as a throw without any warning beforehand. And I feel like that's also not good. There should at least be, right, that's a deprecation strategy. You should have a warning before you remove an attribute or turn it into an error. So yeah, it's not great. Yeah.
I mean, the argument there was that it has been deprecated for years sometimes, but it's a bit like the Hitchhiker's Guide thing where, oh, you could have known that your planet is going to be destroyed. It was in the cellar on some moon in some other galaxy. Everybody had access to it, to the documents that told you that it was going to be destroyed later.
The change log is nice when you want to know everything, but most people don't care.
You're very quiet, Kaito. You have to increase
move the microphone closer. How about now?
Oh, yeah.
All right, that'll do. As I was saying, what you said, basically, you could have known that your planet was going to be blown up and all that. Most people don't read the change log, and that is a reality that we'll have to deal with. Someone that is deeply involved in the process probably will. Someone that is curious about every little change will, but that's a minority. What we need is a low noise way to announce breaking changes along with exactly what needs to be done in order to fix someone's stuff. This is, for example, how Arch Linux handles breaking changes in package updates. They have a mailing list. We can do whatever else, but there's like 3 or 4 mails a year on that list, and when you get one, it's important.
What example is that? Where is this mailing list from?
Arch Linux.
Oh, Arch Linux. I see.
The mail contains exactly what broke and why, along with precise steps for the user to follow. So if you don't really care why it broke or implementation details, you just do as told, and usually it works.
My question on that is, what would be the appropriate cadence? Because how often, do we have any data on how often people actually upgrade their systems? I mean, I know there are people who upgrade them like daily or whatever, but in practical setups where you have a company with 400 people who all use NixOS for some reason.
Given how easy it is to just pin everything with Nix, we probably need some way for it to be interactive. So someone can say, here's what I had. I have a 5-year-old NixOS system, and I'm going to update the latest. How much is my crap going to break? There's no way for us to offer this information piecemeal in general, so it probably needs to be somewhat interactive.
I feel like this would be well solved by, just kind of a migration guide from one system to the next one. And so if you upgrade over 10 releases, you're going to have the breaking changes of the 10 releases. And then it's really just like from where to where do you upgrade, and kind of combine all the breaking changes together from there.
Yeah, a similar approach to that is usually used in corporate upgrade policies. I think Oracle does the kind of thing. Not that they're a good example or anything, mind you, but you have specific upgrade guides, or say the last 5 major versions, and anything older than that is just not supported. I don't know, why didn't you upgrade for all of this time?
I mean, this really boils down to a resource question. How long do we want to keep backwards compatibility around? Because that's always a maintenance overhead. But the question is that really still on point? I mean, right now this is about, well, a process, but the other thing is about how much effort do we want to invest in this?
Probably a lot. And this is kind of important.
I agree. I mean, my personal use case, or like my impression, is that Nix, like the Nix or Nixpkgs guarantees, once you get it working, it should work forever. And when you upgrade, it should not blow up in your face. Still, when you upgrade deliberately, but that only works up to a point because people's time is limited to the with respect to introducing actual improvements and still keeping old stuff around simply for keep other people's stuff working.
Obviously, we should aim to minimize breaking changes. Like, we shouldn't just break things because we feel like it, or because we can't be arsed to keep it backwards compatible. If it needs to be broken, then it will be broken, sure, but it's not something we should take for granted.
Yeah, I feel like there's. So we discussed this mailing list from Arch Linux, but I feel like in most cases we don't need something like that because a lot of breaking changes can be announced with warnings and then errors beforehand. And I think those are like I really appreciate like good warning and error message when I evaluate NixOS and something changed in some way. I think that's totally fine. What isn't fine is when I update it and I get a weird evaluation error that doesn't point me anywhere. And the mailing list would only need to be used when we can't really produce a nice warning or error message. And I think those should be kept incredibly minimal. Like, I don't know, the switch to like systemd init or something might be a change like that, which has the potential to break a lot of things, and we can't really warn for that in a reasonable way. Or maybe we can.
It should be the last option we use. Like, hey, this is going to be hairy. This is what you need to do to fix it. We are sorry, but this is how it is.
Yeah.
Obviously, we should always prefer for Nix itself to tell you right then and there, hey, this broke. Here's how you can fix it.
But yeah, it is kind of right. Valentin mentioned that how much effort do we want to invest in this? I think it is very important. In another, I think in this discussion for the check meta thing, it was mentioned that. By the way, are we are? What is the time? We are already over time, aren't we?
Mm-hmm. Well, technically, we're over minimum time.
Right. So let's keep going for a bit. So it was mentioned there that NixOS, or it was compared to the kernel, to the Linux kernel, which has this rule of not breaking user space at all, ever. I think we don't have to be that strict. We can break things with an appropriate warning and error beforehand. But I think we do need these warnings beforehand. We can't just break stuff.
You should still prefer to have a decent reason for breaking things.
Yeah.
You're muted, Tom. I can see Tom speaking. I don't know if he's meant to be speaking to us because he's muted.
I can't see him speaking. Or yeah, maybe. I think he's on somewhere
seems
else.
to be fine.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that sounds good. Of course, we should not invest like all our time into this, but I do think it's important, and I think it's mainly about kind of conveying to the community that we need everybody to make warnings and errors before making breaking changes, so the check meta thing doesn't happen again.
For a short-term change, how about this? The list of breaking changes is buried somewhere deep in the release notes for NixOS. if these were separate and searchable, that would be a lot better. Like on a single page, all the last, 10 versions, everything got broke, so you can just Control F on there. That would actually be a huge improvement.
Yeah, that also sounds like a good idea. Yeah.
Shouldn't be too hard, given that we're already generating the list. We should just put it somewhere else.
Yeah, that sounds like a plan. I do quickly want to see we have one other agenda item. So Ash, he said he might be there for this, but I guess he's not. It was about, it was just a really quick prompt in Matrix. It was about kind of how to deduplicate packages with different feature sets. So you have all these packages with like enable foo, enable bar, and the more of those you have, like you have one minimal version, one full version of a package, and then someone needs minimal but with one other feature enabled, things like that, which leads to a lot of duplication. And he made some quick proposals how that might be improvable a bit. I think we don't have to discuss this super in depth here, but I do think it's a good idea to talk about. My own idea there would be to have features which can be kind of, I don't care whether it's enabled or not. So you can choose anyone that works. That would be an idea I'd have for that. Say feature is don't care whether enabled or not. That's flexibility. And also there's this other idea of kind of combining feature sets and versions together, because in many ways these are very similar. You have package, you have different versions, you might have version requirements like above this version, below this version, and similarly you have multiple feature sets, you might have feature set requirements, and these kind of combining those into a single concept, a more abstract way of giving requirements and declaring them, might work really well. Also, you have sometimes packages which have like feature sets in their names, like a suffix of this is the GPU version or something like that, or the NVIDIA version. So that might also work.
So, I mean, this implies a little bit of global evaluation. And so this also ties into the previous discussion about module system to basically configure all the different things you're interested in all at once. The other kind of thing I just want to add to have in the notes is that it seems like this is somewhat similar to Haskell, like class, type class resolution, in terms of being like this like semi-ordered lattice where all the options of the correct thing get merged together, and then if compatible, that becomes the thing that is used for the whole closure, and everyone accepts that, hey, adding these things is always acceptable because they're in the don't care category, and therefore adding all the options is fine.
Yeah, so just to, I think, so when I think of lattice, I think of something like this. And I guess, yeah.
Yeah, the idea would be that, also the path of which, I mean, the module system type implementation or whatever is used doesn't care how you get to enable those options and in what order. It's just a matter of fact that, like, we need all of them, and different dependent packages might actually define two different things. Like in your example here, one might have X and one might have Z. Other than that, we didn't get anywhere in terms of implementation.
You're arguing for introducing a form of indirection for including packages in other packages, because right now we refer to excuse me, derivations directly. when we want something to be available in a closure, we refer to auto derivations directly, which implies specific feature sets. You would need to, I'm sorry, you would need to decouple that in some fashion. So you can argue for what you want on one side, and there's a list of provided things on the other, and if something matches, you get a thing.
So I have worked more along the lines of doing a late call of things like a call package, so that we're not actually using derivations for the most part. Instead, trying to manipulate and manage. We're calling them proto derivations or blueprints or something like that. And by doing that, you kind of have a chance to manipulate and solve this problem. Again, it's similar to what would be happening under the hood with the module system, right? Just first solve all the questions of configuration options and then perform the call package composition fix point. I think that does give us more power in general, but I don't know if I'm actually even proposing this as an idea or that it should be done. It's just if we do go down this route, I think a solution should probably consider or look into these sorts of things.
Opinion on this so far is that the effort far outweighs the benefits.
I think it's part of a bigger problem that we can solve. And if we solve, if we do the module system change, or if we do the kind of package versioning cleanup change, I feel like this might be solved alongside with it. So but it is a problem that we should be looking to solve as well. So we should keep it in mind when we look into other solutions.
A design that we might want to look at is SPAC, how they do their configuration of packages.
How do you spell that?
SPAC, SPACK.
SPAC.
They do a whole bunch of, I think it's SPAC. Hopefully I got that right. Is that correct?
Yeah,
yes. They focus on configuration of the package stuff kind of as a first class initial design point, and so they probably have thought about it and have come up with abstractions that might be good to copy.
So I agree with Christian that this is like a compelling design, but probably way off the chart in terms of what we as a community, I don't know about you specifically though, cannot really afford. It's not meaningful to try to afford this. What I would rather like to see is, I mean, since we're already over time, what I would rather like to see in general is an approach where we pick the most important pressing pain points first, especially for those who we most rely on, and this is either occasional contributors or people who are like semi-regulars, to solve like the stuff that they have the most friction with, because that usually turns out to be a lot less work. And although it is an incremental change, it will unleash the energy of many other people who we still don't know that even exist.
Yeah, agreed. I think that maybe for this topic, we just say, hey, here's the thoughts, here's the academic notes for future consideration, but out of scope for our current efforts.
Yeah. Let's track it. Let's keep track of everyone's ideas of how this could potentially be solved, just so we don't forget. Because eventually it'll be relevant. If I don't personally see this as a big problem, but I obviously don't speak for everyone. So if this actually turns into a real tangible thing that we are going to solve right now, then we at least have the cliff notes of what we spoke about.
Yep. We have the meeting notes for that, and also ideally we'd have GitHub issues for all of these. If I have time, I'm going to maintain these a bit better.
Probably talk
But yeah,
about
so
organizing all of that information a bit better at some point, because the meeting notes are nice, but they're not very tractable.
yeah. The hard to get an overview of all the issues there.
It's the same conversation as the Nixpkgs changelog. Someone that wants all the details is going to read them, but most people aren't.
Yeah.
So I vote we just table this for the moment.
Yep. Agreed.
Yep, sounds good. It seems that the main issue being discussed here is not a very big one. We're going into really the bigger picture, I guess.
Be interested
but
to
yeah,
see
so
at least one other problem that could be solved by the same solution.
I didn't quite get that.
I would like to see at least one other problem that could be solved by the same or a similar solution.
Yeah. We want to hit like as many birds with one stone as possible and really solve it from the ground up, which hopefully unlocks a lot of which solves a lot of problems at once, ideally.
Yeah, but I don't disagree. I don't really agree that is a viable option in the first place.
You think we shouldn't do it at all?
No, I don't think we should. I mean, I'm just like listening in, but I have the same kind of problem with documentation. I don't think there's a ground-up solution for this, because a ground-up solution will always, like, if you build a crystalline core of really like well thought-out ideas, eventually you will run against a wall of incompatibilities with current approaches, and you will have to design against them anyway at some point. You'll just kind of delay that frustration. I would instead, from my experience with tackling that documentation monster, is that one really has to go incrementally. So I observe there's no real way around this, and it is frustrating, but it's the only way to get anything done at all.
Yeah, it really is a tricky issue, because in Nixpkgs, on one hand, we have like this huge library of all kinds of packages and examples of people having use cases, and so we have all the use cases we could ever think of, but it's really messy right now. Like, people have just added on stuff here and there, and so what I'd like to see is to really kind of a rethinking of this. Like, with all the use cases we have now, how can we make this better from the start? An incremental might not be a good idea, because we might just add like one other bit, some bit here, some bit there, and that might then just increase the kind of complexity of the whole thing. It's really, I guess, about removing things more than adding things. Like, we want to remove like 10 different ways and replace it with a single one, for example.
Yeah, but that's exactly the point where I'm disagreeing. I mean, I'm not disagreeing on removing something like that looks like a wart. I already talked about this with you specifically. What about if we first document what the 10 different use cases are where people have different approaches, and then remove the one which is least used and least useful. And then we have something like we reduce complexity by 1. Presenting a solution or an approach that will reduce complexity by 10 out of 10, like that, I simply don't believe this is actually feasible in any reasonable amount of time.
Well, so we can't really easily. It sounds like an interesting idea, though. My immediate thought is that we can't just remove one of these ways of doing something, because in the end, they all have their use cases. There are some users that initially added this way of doing something because they couldn't do it in any other way. And so we can't just go ahead and remove these one by one. We need to replace them with something better. And
yeah, with the something better being the best that we currently have, for example, the final packages pattern. So if we have I don't know how many actual override systems we have, at least 3, I suppose. And if we remove one of them, the one that is least used already, that will be one step forward.
So it's really about like replacing one thing with another thing that has more use case, that has more use.
Already established, even if it's not perfect.
Yeah, David?
I think I'm a little bit more on the side where I say we should do big changes, because the reason why Nixpkgs is stuck in certain ways is because in this big community, the only thing that happens over a long time is small incremental changes. But some ideas are just wrong. That's a natural thing to happen in a big ecosystem. And I think these are the big things that we need to fix. There's some problems we're never going to really fix nicely if we only do a lot of small incremental changes. So I think this is, as I see it, the main point of this whole team. We come together because we want to tackle the big things that individuals would have trouble to solve.
Yeah. So I feel like we might have a bit of a unclear definition of like what we mean by incremental change. I think it's good that we need to make it incremental and that people can easily upgrade from the old way to the new way. But I think it shouldn't be incremental in the way that we can only make very small changes and that users can like reuse, I don't know, 90% of their existing code. I do expect people to like have to update a lot of their code. Incremental, like small incremental changes might not work as well for that. Like with our goals, we want to have like a good base foundation for Nixpkgs. And currently that's just not the case. Like a lot of code out there in third-party packages as well, and Nixpkgs is just kind of bad. And if we want to have bigger improvements, we need to have like everybody update in some way. And that might mean the kind of making it Nexus module based instead. And that would mean updating like essentially all of the package code out there. But if it is a better model, and that might very well be the case, and it really works well in practice, then that's like a good change in the end. And in 10 years, we'd look back and we're going to say, damn, we're glad we made that change. We had to just rip off the Band-Aid and make this bigger change.
I'm doubtful about this ripping off the Band-Aid thing, really. Actually, David, I think we should do both. So I mean, we have some historical examples of this ripping the Band-Aid thing. So Python 2 to 3 was a disaster. The Flakes migration still is not complete after, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, is it? I don't know when like the actual effort started, which had like significant funding and sustained effort. We still are not done. There's no ripping off the Band-Aid. We need to have both. We cannot, for example, so I can only speak from my very specific documentation experience. We cannot just go about documenting all of the Flake stuff while it's not ready. Like neither the problem nor the solution are fully understood to the very end. And the same, I think, is true for Nixpkgs. We have a living system with thousands of users. I don't know how many exactly, but there must be in the tens of thousands, for which we have to supply a living thing. So we have to take care of that thing without changing it all too much. You cannot make people to migrate. This will just lose a lot of trust.
Yeah, I think I agree in the point that whatever big change we do, we need to have a very smooth upgrade path. We can't just break people's stuff. I think I'm fully with you.
Chris?
Lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, right. First, I don't think we should ever do any Band-Aid ripping, ever. I don't think there's a good reason to, other than to make our lives easier. And
what do you mean specifically by Band-Aid ripping?
Band-Aid ripping means everything breaks and we leave the burden on the user to fix their crap. Band-Aid ripping means we don't have a viable transition path.
No, we should definitely not do that. I don't think anybody wants
that.
I also agree. Yes.
The other thing that I want to bring up here is that there is a difference. And it might not be obvious, but there is a backend and a front end to Nixpkgs. The front end being what the end user sees and uses, and the backend being all of the fundamental code that actually makes Nixpkgs possible. Incremental changes really only apply to the front end. It is a thing that exists in order to make a transition path viable and useful and easy to the user, so they don't have to redo their entire configuration. On the back end, you can rip out all you want. I don't care. As long as the front end remains reasonably stable and has a deprecation process and all of that, you can do whatever you want.
I think the problem a bit is that there's no clear separation between front end and back end, because basically all of the functionalities in Nix packages are exposed somehow, and people use them in arbitrary ways in downstream projects. I don't think there is something in Nix packages that's marked as like, oh, this is internal, never use that somewhere.
Definitely not explicit. It's also not very clear, but it is a thing that exists, at least conceptually.
Yeah, I'd say this might be good. That the API surface of Nix packages is just too unspecified. Like, we should make it smaller and make it explicit what the API surface is, or the front end.
I would agree with that, yes. Perhaps even introducing some decoupling between the two will actually make maintenance and further changes easier in the future. I don't know how viable that is, or how much work it would be, or how much breaking changes that will require, but at least it's a decent idea if we could pull it off.
Yeah, I mean, we can always build stuff underneath, but I want to insist that to make the interface, the attack surface more explicit, to change it, we first need to make it explicit. Only then will the required changes be obvious.
Yeah, Nixpkgs doesn't really have a surface area that we could actually look at and say, okay, this is what we cannot break. Nix is a little bit like Lisp in that regard. You can change everything. Emacs users will know what I mean. Maybe we should have a small core part that everything else uses with a clear defined API.
Well, we can do something about that. We can just define the use cases that we deliberately support and endorse, or identify as valid, like as worthwhile of documenting. We can do this, and Nix has the same kind of problem. It does a billion things, but we can support like happy user stories very explicitly and make them well defined.
Yeah. Every problem is social and documentation in the end. Somehow.
Exactly. Yes, because with computers we can do anything. Every problem is social. Yeah.
I guess the thing that matters here in the end is the user experience. We want users to be happy using Nix, which implies that Nix is useful, it is performant, it is stable.
Yeah, I do want to say we are out of time. Well, we said at least 30 minutes, but at most an hour. We are out of time about now. But I think that's a very good discussion to have, and we can continue this in Matrix as well, or next week's meeting as well.
Yes, I think at least this that we were talking about right now is very important for us to discuss in depth, and also how exactly we are going to go about implementing any kind of deprecation strategy. Those are very, very important points as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, but so I'm gonna officially stop the meeting now. Those who want to continue discussing can also stay in here. But yeah, see you, everybody else.
See you.
On.